Thank you so much. I'm really excited about this. I do storytelling as just part of my work, and as an international speaker. And so when this came up as a topic, I could not wait to really jump right on it. I use storytelling for a number of reasons, and I'm going to go through some of those in today's presentation. I got chat prompts going, so when you see a prompt to enter something in the chat, please go ahead and do that. I love a good chat room. Nonetheless, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I started off in human resources. I've been doing HR for probably 30 plus years. And I love it when people are kind enough to tell me that I don't look old enough to have been doing HR for that long. That is such a high compliment, in my opinion. But anyways, I started out in HR when it was still called personnel, and it was really kind of an administrative function, and then transitioned itself into being more of a business partner strategy. Now, having said that, I worked with a lot of entrepreneurs, and probably about 10 years into my career in HR, I wanted to start my own consulting firm, and so I did. And it really just kind of took off. I had that consulting firm for about 17 years until I sold it. And when I had that firm and worked with a little more than 1,000 businesses in 15 different industries, and got to see what was like the same and what was really different in business and in a lot of different industries. I am a mental health advocate. I became a more visible advocate after the passing of my daughter in 2022. I am a runner. The picture that is there on the screen is me, third time. No, that was my second time doing the New York Marathon. I've now done it 3 times. Running is like yoga for me. It's really how I kind of clear my head. And a lot of the things that you see on there have to do with my work in business, and a little bit of it in the mental health space. Even though I started my career in human resources, I really always wanted to be a professional keynote speaker. There was something about the way they would inspire or motivate, and I thought, really, that's kind of what I want to do. But there's such a passion that I have for HR strategy that I just wondered if there was space for me to kind of marry the two. How could I stand in front of audiences and show expertise, especially since we're not allowed to sell anything from the stage, and still somehow leverage that to support my business? I would be curious to know first in the chat if there are others here who are in the speaker space, stepping up on stages or in rooms and sharing your knowledge and expertise, because I feel like you're going to be my cheerleading squad. So I remember the first time I was asked to stand in front of an audience and talk about burnout and women specifically. And I loved it. And I really kept thinking there's got to be a way to leverage this. And I want to say that my career advanced. Let's see if I can find that. There we go. And I did. I reached my dream and became an international keynote speaker. I am represented by a speakers bureau that's out of Illinois. I have been on national television programs like CBS Mornings, Extra. I've done Katie Couric Media, and a number of others. I've been featured in People magazine. The Washington Post came to my house for a couple of days and did a great story. I've been quoted in a number of publications, and I've been a New York Times bestseller. So today, what I want to focus on is for anyone who is hoping to get into the speaker space and leverage that, not just to be out in front of people, but to bring you business without selling anything or sounding like you're selling something, then I hope you're going to capture a lot in today's presentation. Can you guys still see the screen Pretty good?
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. Um, this was one of the first things that captured me. It's that the story itself was not where everything finished. That was really the bridge. It was me coming from somewhere and then taking people somewhere and then finishing with something that would hopefully make them want to take an action, whatever that action was, whether that was to buy something or donate something or register or follow me, whatever it was, that is where I was going to land. So the story, I had to learn and train myself. The story wasn't the actual product that I was selling. The story truly was what was going to take me just from one side to the other, depending on what I was moving through. So I'd love for you to throw it in the chat. One word or a short phrase. What do you want people to associate with your name or your business? And for me, when I stood up in front of stages, and I'm going to share some of my stories, I'm going to be the case study for today. You guys will each be your own case study. So when I'm sharing things with you, I want you to share your version of that, or take note using your version of that, so that when we're done, you've got your story that you could hopefully stand in front of large audiences and share. And in doing so, bring yourself business without sounding like you're throwing out a sales pitch. I know for me, when I think of what I want people to associate me with, it would be knowledgeable. It would be authentic. I want people to associate me with being a subject matter expert. When I move away from people from that stage, those are the things that I want them to say. She really knew what she was talking about. Wow, she came across as really real. She was transparent. All of those things is where I want to leave people. And all of that drives the way I position the story. I love that. Connector, caring, expert. Thank you. I love that. 100% and absolutely. So I tend to use kind of a story roadmap. Now, I can say this, that I watched some of the previous sessions that you guys have enjoyed. And one of them was a lady named Star, who did a phenomenal job in talking about storytelling. And so she brought up something that I thought was really valid, and it's something that I also believe in. And that's that, when someone is talking to you in those small group settings, network, one-on-one, and they're asking you about yourself, the what do you do question. And I always found that difficult for me because what I do just turns so many corners that I tend to narrow it down to being an HR strategist or a business strategist. But nonetheless, when people ask, what do you do? The response will often include something around the job title or a role, like I'm a consultant or coach or marketing, I own a marketing company, or I sell insurance. And that answers the question, but it doesn't create conversation. It's not going to be a bridge. So imagine saying this. Now, this one kind of threw me, and I'm going to share it with you. But when people approach me with this kind of take, it's almost cringy. So if I say to someone, what do you do? And their response is this: I help family-owned businesses prepare the next generation to lead. I started doing this after watching a successful business nearly fall apart because the founder had never prepared his children to take over. I think that's great, but you almost lost me when you start sharing that. And that's just me. Some of you may be intrigued to want to hear more. And so the way I would phrase that as a storyteller is this: most businesses aren't sold. they actually evaporate because the owner didn't prepare anyone to take over. So what I do is help make sure that that just doesn't happen. And I feel like sometimes people find that a little more intriguing. You want to hear more about, what do you mean the businesses evaporate? What does that look like? How do you prepare someone to take over? And then the questions may start coming in. And I'm curious to know, if you are in business and you are approached with that question of what do you tend to lean into that first example? I help family-owned businesses prepare the next generation to lead. Or were you more intrigued by the second response? Most businesses aren't sold, they evaporate because the owner didn't prepare anyone to take over. I love that. Thank you, Scott. I agree. I just feel like the second just leaves so much room for conversation and not just what you do. And it's sharing that little factoid that most businesses aren't sold, they evaporate, that begins to position you as someone who understands the industry, not just your job or your role. And that is honestly sometimes at the heart of it. It's not just understanding what you do, but when you are able to tie what you do to a level of expertise that will intrigue someone to test your knowledge, which then, as you all know, positions you in trust, the next step is to take some kind of action because that trust has been built. So with the story roadmap, the S is start with the audience. And that's so critical, knowing your audience. T is think about the transformation. O is organize the story. R is reveal something real. Y is your call to action. And as we go through the framework, I'm going to use, like I said, my own story as a case study. A few that I share from the stage, and I'll explain why I share that particular story. And also, I want you to take notes and start thinking through the story that you tell when you are either selling or trying to secure a client, or even third, if you were going to stand in front of an audience of 1,000 people, how are you going to position the story so that it's interesting and intriguing? You're not selling anything, but when you're done, people want to do business with you. That becomes the challenge of standing on the stage. I can tell you, just as a speaker, everybody's got a story. There's a million of them. I listen to speakers and I'm intrigued. But here's the thing, so many stories that I hear aren't different than the story I could tell. And so I would often wonder, how did they get up there and how can I get up there? Because I have a story too. So I'm going to start with the S. And I've also kind of included some of my pictures in doing speaking engagements. This is one where I was on CBS Mornings. Gail King is a dear friend, and I've been on their show a couple of times, but whenever I'm there, I'm telling a story, but man, I've got to get it all the way down and fit between their question and the next commercial break, which takes some skill. But I practice that and I do notes about it. What do I need to share? How do I get to the ending quickly? And some of those tips are in this presentation, because there are times, like I know, when you got to condense that story down, you don't have all day. And so to make it quick, still be impactful, you've got to have your notes and your story set. So the first step always is start with your audience. And that can sound strange because we're talking about your story, but the effective storytelling isn't about what you want to say. It's about what the audience needs to hear. So before you choose a story, you want to ask questions of yourself, like, who's in front of me? What are they dealing with? What do they care about? What do they need to understand? And what belief am I trying to reinforce or change? And then lastly, What action do I want them to take? And I go in many different directions with the actions that I need someone to take. Sometimes it is just connect with me. Sometimes the action is a follow-up on information I may be sharing through a podcast or a webinar. And sometimes it's connect with me on LinkedIn so we can continue this conversation. And I know that's about to turn into business. So I'm going to use my role as an HR strategist, and I'm going to talk you through this when I'm talking about audience. Same life experience told several different ways. So if I am speaking to other HR professionals, I might focus on a difficult employee relations decision and what it taught me about leadership. If I'm talking with business owners, I might focus on the cost of waiting too long to address a workplace issue. And if I'm speaking to women in leadership, I might focus on navigating spaces where I had to prove my expertise before people were willing to hear it. The experience can be connected, but the focus changes based on my audience. And I think this is so critical. There's so many times when I can tell someone has told a story over and over, the same story, and it doesn't matter where the conversation starts. For them, all roads are just always going to lead to this specific story. And that just doesn't work. When you are the subject matter expert, you can look at that subject from 6 different angles and make it relevant. So here's what I want you to throw into the chat. The people I want to reach are struggling with what? The people you want to reach, what is their struggle? I'm looking in the chat, guys. Thank you. Growing a customer base. Function, flow, overall story of their business space or home, financial clarity, and inaction. I love that. Growing their business. So I love that. And I want you to keep that in mind. It sounds like many of you are building your story. What are you going to focus on as your own case study for the purpose of today? So this is excellent. Connecting their personal financial plan to their business. I love that. Struggling with growing their business. People that will show up and in action. Being recognized online. I love that. So the T, so that was the S. The S is centered around knowing your audience. Start with the audience. T is think about the transformation. Strong stories involve change. And the change doesn't have to be dramatic. Honestly, it's not, hey, I climbed a mountain, although I did know someone who climbed a mountain and used to talk about that every single time I heard him speak. It's not about, hey, I lost everything or survived some disaster. It doesn't have to be that dramatic to be a meaningful story. Maybe something happened and you changed your mind. Or maybe you discovered that something you thought about business was actually wrong. Maybe you made a mistake and developed a better process. I think that's how the Post-it note was created. Maybe you faced a client problem that forced you to rethink your services. Transformation is the difference between simply describing an event and then telling the story. And an event can sound a little bit like this. I opened my business in 2001. That's an event. And I did. I started my consulting practice in 2001. But a story sounds like this. I opened my business in 2001 because I kept watching small business owners struggle with the problems that large companies have, but those large companies have an entire department to help them. And that small business owner all by themselves. And I knew there was a need that I could fill. It's that story versus the event. Now I understand that there's a motivation. For me, the motivation when I would talk and share stories one-on-one was obviously that this would lead to securing business. I can tell you something that's really funny about the transformation, and you can see that prompt. I used to think blank, but now I know blank. I used to think that being a business owner meant you worked your hours, traditional hours. You got to call all the shots. You made all the decisions. And now I know nothing could be further from the truth. When you are a business owner, you work half days and you can pick any 12-hour window you want to. And when you're a business owner, you don't call all the shots. Your clients are calling some of those shots. Those are things that I learned. But if I'm relating that to what I sell, I used to think that in a small business, if you wore multiple hats, you had a solid team. But now I know forcing people to wear multiple hats will burn them out and tax them mentally, and they will leave. So I want to see you guys also use that as a prompt in your story. I used to think blank, but now I know blank. And that is a powerful part of storytelling. It's the transformation. And when you are able to put your story in there, like I did, this is what I thought about being a business owner. This is what I thought about being an entrepreneur, but now I know this. And I know that firsthand because I am one now. It has a different kind of land. So I used to think blank, but now I know blank. I want like one or two brave people to tell me what that was. I used to think blank, but now I know blank. And that's the before, and then there's this shift, and then it's an after. And that is part of the transformation in storytelling. So I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to throw that in the chat. This is going to be active. And like I said, by the time we're done, my hope is that you have kind of rewritten the story you share. And maybe that'll take you to the stage because now you can tell that story without sounding like you're selling something. I call that just attraction marketing. And maybe your story is going to help you the next time you're at a networking function and you want to share what you do. And you can start the what you do using that prompt. You know, I used to think that people just pass the business one generation to the next. But now I know if you don't prepare the next owner, your business could evaporate before you've even had a chance to sell it. I used to think, but now I know. I love it. I used to think interior design was about creating beautiful spaces, but now I know it's about functionality and telling a well-crafted story that brings ROI. Girl, right? I completely agree. I completely agree. That is a good one. Thank you. Transformation. All right. Organize the story. Honestly, be clear. It doesn't have to be a long story. I've shared a couple with you that were quite short and succinct. And when I am doing a news show and I'm going to tell a story, they've typically brought me on for some reason. I have to tell that story, but they'll tell me you got about 3 minutes. And so I can't do a race. I have to be clear. And these are some of the details that I use. It doesn't always have to be short, but I've prepared that short version and then I've prepared a longer version. So I want to talk about O, which is organize a story. And this is just one example of the setup, the struggle, the shift, solution, and then significance. And the setup tells us where you were and what was happening. And you want to keep it brief because that's kind of your background. And there's so many people, and you probably have had a chance to talk to them, or someone like this has tried to sell you, when they are giving so much backstory, you barely remember what we were talking about, and they've probably lost their point. So there's the setup, and then there's the struggle, and the struggle introduces the tension. What went wrong? What problem did you face? What decision had to be made? What fear, frustration, obstacle, what happened? And then there's the shift. And that's the moment something changed. And it might be a conversation, a failure, a realization, something someone said, or a decision you finally made. Something shifted. And then there's a solution. And that explains what you did with what you learned. What process did you create? What service did you develop? And then there's the significance. And that answers the audience's silent question, what does this have to do with me? Now, I'm going to, again, use myself as the example, and I'm going to share with you one of the stories that I have shared from a smaller stage. And it has to do with me tearing my ACL. Now, I thought I was hot stuff. I love being an athlete. My kids play football. I always wanted to understand it. I thought the best way for me to learn it would be on the field, from the actual field. And so I joined a flag football league, and I was excited about learning the game. Now, what went wrong is that in about the third game, I tore my ACL. The quarterback threw a high pass. I jumped up, came down, twisted the wrong way, and it was obliterated. Now, the problem is I was running a company, and I felt like I was the company. I was a consultant, the lead consultant, and I had a lot of support people working with me. I did not know how I was going to pull myself out of that business so that I could go through surgery and rehab my knee. And the shift, the moment something changed, I realized that I was spending all of my time working in my business and not on my business. I was going to have to kind of reprogram my entire way of thinking about my value to my company, because I was going to have to be absent. And so the solution, and I'm breaking this up for you. Typically, when I tell this story, it's a little more fluid. The solution was this, that I had to train my team and outsource parts of my business so that I could step away and watch my business run itself. That was the solution. Even though I was small, I was able to do that successfully by training my team and outsourcing key parts of my business. And then we get to the significance. When that person listening to my story goes, well, what does this have to do with me? And that's when I tell them, we provide that outsourced HR service. So if someone on your team, if you had to step away, you were in an accident or something happens, and you are divvying up the responsibilities and you don't have a solid HR person on your team, that is a service that my company can provide. So keep us in mind, think it through, but when you are trying to figure out how to pull yourself out of that business so you can work on it, not in it, we can be a great resource for you. And that's where the significance comes in. So I would like this. Again, thinking through your story with the setup, the struggle, where's the shift, the aha moment? What solution is going to fix it? And what did that have to do with the client? When you told that story, what did it have to do with your prospects or the person in front of you who might have an opportunity for you? So the setup, the struggle, shift, solution, and the significance. All right. Next up is R. Reveal something real. Thank you, Moose, for that comment. I just happened to glance at that. Thank you for that. They used to think you had to go to weekly networking meeting. Now I know I can do it monthly, utilizing technology and having time to build great relationships. I love that. So R, reveal something real. Vulnerability is not the same as disclosure. There have been times when I have heard people share and it felt like they were oversharing. I just kept thinking, where are we going with that? And while I'm sharing this and talking with you guys, I'm going to share story number 2. Throw that in the chat. What makes vulnerability difficult in business? Like, why is that difficult sometimes for people to kind of go there and be a little transparent in telling their story? And so while you're doing that, I'm going to talk about why this is important. People connect with honesty. They want to hear what you learned, but they also want to understand what it costs you to learn it. That is so important. Each year, there is a workshop at Harvard in November, and I go each year because they have a whole new crop of students. And the professor who runs the workshop brings in entrepreneurs. But here's the caveat. She wants you to share, it's a business class. She wants you to share your story, not focusing so much on your successes, but she wants you to talk through your failures. Like, where did you miss the mark? Because in her mind, that is where her students are going to learn a little bit more. Not how everything worked out beautifully and now you're a millionaire, but where were the moments when you thought, well, that ain't going to work? And so I go every year and I get very vulnerable in talking to this class of students about where I missed the mark. And I get really real. Everything from hiring family that just did not work to tending to share my ideas at my staff meetings and my staff taking that as instruction. I have to pontificate someplace else. I mean, little things that I learned that cost me big. I always share that. And so the same goes for you. People are going to connect with that honesty and that feeling of vulnerability. But they want to understand, like I said, not just what it cost you, but what you learned. I can tell you this, and I love this. This is kind of giving some examples. Well, let me go here. Before you share, you want to ask yourself, why am I telling the story? Is this story ready to serve someone? What details are necessary? What details are private? And there are some things that I shared with the class at Harvard, and there are some things that I just knew it was better to just keep to myself. Some of those lessons I learned, I was glad that I learned them in private. What part of the story belongs to someone else? And I don't generally share stories that involve someone else. I just don't think it's fair unless I have that person's permission. Am I comfortable knowing somebody might repeat what I share? And can I tell the story and still feel emotionally safe afterwards? And the reason I bring this up, the vulnerability piece, is because I appreciate Daniello. Is that right, Daniello?
You nailed it.
Okay. I appreciate you sharing part of my bio when we started. But I lost my daughter. She was 30. I lost her in January of 2022. My daughter battled a mental illness and she succumbed to that illness in January 22 and took her life. And at the time that happened, I had sold my business. I was working through a non-compete. And so I was working in-house as a chief human resource officer for a national organization. And I had a pretty large team. And so I had to step away from work. I took several weeks off. But then I had to figure out how to return to work. And that really is when I stepped more prominently into the mental health advocacy space and was able to combine all of my knowledge as an HR professional with everything I learned about where we are with mental health. And I stand before large audiences and talk about how to manage your mental health at work. So when I tell this story, my focus is not on my daughter and her mental health. My focus is on managing all of the emotion and grief, still having to lead a team and still having to show up for work. What does that look like? I'm always surprised when I talk about this at the number of people who come up to me afterwards, all professionals, who will begin to tell their stories of dealing with tough situations and still having to show up at work. And so that is a topic that I use for speaking engagements. And when I am sharing that story, I leave people with lots of tips and I leave people with lots of resources, and I'm not selling anything, but they do present me with more speaking opportunities. And so it is the getting additional opportunities to speak that's kind of the product in those moments. And that is what took me to presenting to the Michael J. Fox Foundation team, the Netflix executives, Eli Lilly. These are all organizations that wanted to talk about mental health in the workplace, but just didn't know anyone who could handle it. And because I had the HR background, they knew that I would be sensitive to what was going on in their workplaces. And so keeping in line with that and being authentic. Sometimes we're so afraid of being vulnerable that we polish all the humanity out of the story. So let me give you some comparisons. Someone might say, there were some challenges. What we mean is, I was scared the business was going to fail. And that just sounds more authentic. We might say, I had to make a difficult decision. But what we mean is, I knew the right decision might disappoint someone that I really cared about. That is authentic. We might say, I experienced a transition. And what we mean is, I didn't recognize myself anymore. Those moments of truth and that level of vulnerability draws people in and creates a feeling of trust. So telling the truth and being vulnerable with certain things. Again, you don't have to tell all your business, but you do want to be human. So I'm curious to know, I'm going to look in the chat now from you all, what makes vulnerability difficult in business? And I love this. Thank you, Martha. My version of vulnerability is self-depreciation. But as a new business owner, that self-doubt is not good at building up confidence in my potential clients. I hear you completely. That's, there is something to the fake it till you make it, but there's also a beauty in the vulnerability. Not so much the self-deprecating. I do that as well sometimes, but in that honesty. And I don't know that that fits in with your story if you're talking to your client or a potential client about something, but I love that you shared that. I can absolutely see that. So as I said, especially when it comes to the vulnerability piece, you want to know why you're telling that. what information you want to share because it helps to deliver that story, what still belongs only to you, and can you end it with a lesson? Alrighty. Why? This is your call to action. Now, every story, I mean, it's got to lead somewhere. It's funny. I've often said this that, if there's a story that's not going anywhere, that's just somebody rambling. And I think we've all stood in front of that person and heard that person, and you kept thinking, where's this going? Where's this going? And then it was over. Don't do that. You definitely want to end that with some kind of call to action. I do it, as I said, when I'm talking about mental health, I offer a call to action. I'm usually given a series of tips, and I will tell them to incorporate one of those tips. Or I will tell them, look up one of those resources on your phone right now. So I am going somewhere with that. If I'm talking to someone, with my ACL story and being sure that they outsource, I will tell them, start inventorying your business right now and looking for the things that you may be able to outsource, like your payroll if you're doing that in-house, or some HR pieces, maybe your marketing. What can you do if you couldn't show up tomorrow to make sure your business was still running? So, the story, when I say it should lead somewhere, doesn't always mean that you're asking someone to buy something. So, as I mentioned, your call to action might be encouraging people to think differently or ask a question or get a resource, schedule a conversation. Maybe that call to action is that they make a change or join a networking group. Whatever that is, let your story lead somewhere. All roads are going to lead to that one place in your story. It shouldn't ever feel like you just told this heartfelt story and then all of a sudden, you turn on the sales pitch and it feels like a late night commercial. If it doesn't fit, then that is when you may leave with a way to schedule and continue the conversation. And maybe during that call, that's when you're going to make your sales pitch. 2 stories every business owner needs: the authority story, why you know what you know, and the action story, what you want them to do next. Always 2 stories. As a matter of fact, if I'm talking about the authority story that turned into an action story, I happened to be talking to a person at an event and shared with them that I had just gotten my certification as a diversity professional. And then I went on to say that there was one specific area of diversity that I really wanted to study and learn more about, and that was generational diversity, because we have so many generations in the workforce and we all have different thoughts about work. And I want to be able to talk to business owners about what that means. She happened to be in the insurance industry. And she said, wow, I absolutely get that. We are struggling with the younger generation, Gen Z. And I said, what's your struggle? And she said, well, insurance, it's, we're getting older and we're not seeing a lot of younger people come in. And so I began to share with her some of the things that I'd learned about Gen Z. And immediately she said, we need to change our sales pitch. Oh, and by the way, I chaired this organization where you come and speak at our conference, and I was more than happy to do it. I spoke at her conference, and then someone there in insurance had me speak at theirs. And what came out of that was an opportunity to work with some of the sales and marketing team and the HR person on how to attract that specific generation. And I told them, Gen Z is not out here hoping to get a car, get married, buy the house. Buying a house is just so far removed from their dreams right now. But here are the things that are important to them. And this is the way you need to pitch the business so that people will want to come work here. The action story, that is something that I use, as I said, whenever I'm talking about mental health. I don't need them to buy anything. I need them to take an action. So I can go through the the three stories that I've shared. And I know that there's that one sentence, that one thing that catches them, that makes them listen. And many times when I'm telling my story about tearing my ACL, I'm telling them about the agony that I felt when I realized that there were people depending on me, for their job. And I was now going to have to step away. And what was that going to look like? When I'm talking about mental health, I always share that people look like they're perfectly fine when they sit there in the office, and on the inside, they're falling apart. And here's what we can do to help them. So there's always that kind of piece, that part of the story that lands and people remember that. And so I'm not going to ask you to share that sentence that carries the heart of your story. I'm going to tell you, you need a sentence, that shift part that will carry the heart of the story. That when you walk away, that's a piece they're going to remember, and they're going to build that story from the center out. Now, I do have a handout. I'm not tech savvy, so I do not know how to upload it. I promise I will send it. I will send it, and it includes the pieces that I've shared with you, the story acronym, a few other things, but also it has this story starter, and that's something that I do want to leave with you. So I'll work with Daniel to figure out how to get that to everyone. And attach it. And the great thing about this is that when you're filling this in, it's going to help you build that story. And you can go in more detail with that story, if you have more time and a larger audience, and you can succinct it down, but you'll cover those areas. So I feel like that's about where I'm going to end it. This is really kind of summarizing some of the things that I've said. And so I'm going to end it there because I would love to have a moment to open up for questions. How do I stop? There's a part where I can stop sharing. Questions or comments. That's what I'm interested in right now. Questions or just comments. Oh, I hate not being able to see everybody.
I think it was wonderful. My comment or question when we were talking about the whole opening up and being vulnerable thing,
Yes.
as I feel like I tend to have a motor mouth and don't really know when to just shut it down.
I love that. I am that way. I am that way too sometimes, and I have been in the room with people who are that way. I think it really is like Stephen Covey said, begin with the end in mind. Where are we going with this? And that will
Yeah.
help you tell that story and land there. So you are going to be moving that story to that place or to that point that you want to make, and that sometimes can help tremendously.
Right on.
I hear you do that. Yes, sir. How are you doing, Moose?
I'm good. I'm in my 11th year with Network in Action, and this has been by far one of the most favorite agendas, topics that I've done. The engagement from the members has really been incredible. A lot of us are doing the same professional introduction. I don't use the word elevator pitch or commercial, it's so old. But I mean, I know what they're going to say before they even get up and say it. So I would not let them do that. And having them take 10 minutes to write out, their thoughts, I guess, whatever,
Hmm.
was really, really helpful. And
Yeah.
I saw people not being on their phones, that it was a different message and how you helped someone, and the reason, what pain point you did. It's a great agenda. And I thank you very much for being a part of Network in Action.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Great comment, though. I do, the elevator pitch, I do think sometimes it's so rehearsed that
Mhm.
it starts to sound inauthentic.
Mhm.
Um, it's almost as bad as pulling up to the drive-through at a fast food place when they just, kind of mutter out, "How can I help you? What do you want?" kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so it's really important to change that up and use some of those prompts that
Mhm.
I've shared to change up your story to get
Mhm.
people engaged.
Yes, I loved it.
Thank you.
One thing I wrote down during your presentation is they want to learn what you learned and what it costs to learn it. And that
Yes.
was kind of my grand takeaway.
Yes. 100%. You know what? If I just stood in front of an audience and just rambled on about we've all heard that to work on your business, not in your business. And many of us walk away going, "Oh my gosh, but if I do that, my business will collapse or nothing will happen and blah, blah, blah." And people won't buy into what I'm saying. But when I can stand up there and tell them this really happened to me, and I hoped that when I returned to the office, I still had a business there. They really take note.
Right
I love
on.
that.
I think this is Scott here. I think
Scott.
it's the terminology because like when you say the same thing but just change a couple words, and when you said like evaporate, that just really makes it different. And then I like the word struggle. I help businesses that struggle. So a lot of times it's just wordsmith and it makes it a big difference.
Absolutely. Be human. You are talking to a person. Be
Mhm.
human. Don't forget that part of it. And, I have some favorite comedians, and the comedians who talk about things that happen to everybody in your everyday life, they're so much more relatable than somebody in their hypothetical situation. And the same goes when you're connecting with that person about your business or your why. When you are able to break it down to something they can absolutely relate to, they're listening. They're listening.
Yeah, in our agenda, the one thing I really liked was the first thing was make it and I've said this before, but not on the story part of it, but make it real specific. So like a new college graduate just got out of college and he had no money and he wanted to start a chiropractic, and so anyway, or hey, we had a couple that just moved here from out of state to move to Meridian, Idaho. They're 21-year-old kids. I mean, making the story real specific rather than, oh, I had a client that I helped.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. People can relate to that when it is specific. People can relate to that. I love that. I'm going to turn this back over to you, Daniello,
Okay, April. Well,
and
thank
thank
you.
everybody for allowing me to be here.
Thank you once again for being a part of this. And again, it was a wonderful presentation. I do want to invite everyone to, let me go ahead and share my screen for just a moment and make sure I got the right one here. So everybody see what's happening in August, August 5th. We have our Network with the Nations. Do check back if you want to connect with people all around the world. Be there on the first Wednesday of every month. Network with the Nations. And then on the third Wednesday of the month, we're going to have Miss Alexandria. Oh my, I cannot read today. Alexandria Broman. Um, Social Selling Accelerator, the three-step system to turn followers into paying clients. That's August 19th. And then our very own Andrew Johnson, what makes a great NIA member. Do check in for that on the fourth Wednesday of the month. Oh, we did it once again. Once again, thank you to Miss April Simpkins. This was wonderful. And I
Thank
hope to see you
you.
all on the next one. Take care now.
Sounds good. Bye.
All right.